Baruch Hashem Yahweh, bless the name of Yahweh. We are in, I can't believe it, Scroll 13, Part 4, and I don't think I'm going to be able to stretch it out to Part 5. I could, but I'm not going to. This is the culmination of almost a year's work. Ezekiel and the revelation of the 13 scrolls. This is the last one. Can't believe it. So it has a great title, I think. I think you'll like the double entendre. The Barber Prophet and the End Time Prophecy of Thirds. The Barber Prophet and the End Time Prophecy of Thirds. Of course, a bit of a double entendre, those who know me and my skills with a straight edge razor or lack thereof. But Ezekiel here in this 13th scroll, his final vision, he has just endured physical suffering and hunger, and now we come to the end of the vision with warnings of increasing urgency. So we're going to be looking at Scroll 13, which comes to us in the Masoretic text. We're going to be looking at, in particular, chapter 5 and verse 1. So Ezekiel, in this part of the text, he's the savage barber. He really is, because he's going to be wielding a straight-edge razor at the very throat of Israel. He is going to be the savage barber wielding the straight-edge razor at the throat of Israel. And no amount of blood that is drawn is going to purge Israel of the disease. Remember in the old days, even today, when you see the sign of the barber, that comes from back in the old days when they would do bloodletting, where the barber would be the one that would cut you with the straight edge razor, because they had this crazy idea that they would bleed you out, and sometimes they'd put leeches on you to aid in the bloodletting. But here we see that Ezekiel, no matter how much blood is purged from the throat of Israel, famine, sword, pestilence will permeate the body for a wholesale destruction, which is ultimately going to end in Israel's scattering into the nations. And you, son of man, take a sharp sword and use it like a barber's razor, and cause it to pass upon your head and upon your beard. Then take scales to weigh it and divide the hair. Now, this is the part where I got my title, The Barber Prophet and the End Time Prophecy of Thirds, because we're going to see the thirds now. You shall burn with fire a third part in the midst of the city when the days of the siege are fulfilled, and you shall take a third part and smite it with a knife, and a third part you shall scatter to the wind. And I will draw out a sword after them. And you shall also take a few hairs and bind them on the edge of your garment. Then take some hairs again and cast them into the midst of the fire and burn them in the fire. For from it shall come a fire that spreads to all Israel. There we have it. The Barber Prophet and the End Time Prophecy of Thirds. So the metaphor of the sword, of course, is an allusion to Nebuchadnezzar. Now, some of you who've been watching this ministry from quite some time, you'll notice that I don't have that skanky old beard that I once used to have. I could never quite grow one full and mature like yourself there. But mine was a little bit, too much of a strong wind and the thing would take off. But, I got a lot of criticism from many of the ultra-messianics when I shaved my face. Well, you're breaking the Torah. Well, I thought, this is a great opportunity to address that, because really, where does this teaching come from? We're looking at the barber here. We're looking at the shaving. Let's look at this rabbinic tradition of shaving, which comes from Leviticus 19, verse 27. Because I don't know if we've got any of those really old YouTubes when my beard was like down here. I think somebody like got in there and got rid of some of them because I was maybe too crazy, radical. But I'm sure somebody downloaded them somewhere. If you have online got any of those, then give us an email because we'd love to show them. They'd be kind of funny. I think I had a big silver goblet and sat on a throne or something back in the day, right? Anyway, let's turn to Leviticus 19:27, and let's address a rabbinical teaching that teaches us in Leviticus 19:27 that we're not to shave our beards. But if that was so, think about it, then Yahweh would be instructing Ezekiel to transgress the Torah. And if Ezekiel was instructed to transgress the Torah by Yahweh himself, wouldn't that make Ezekiel just another false prophet? Surely it can't be a transgression of the Torah to have a shave. But many would say that it is, and that myself is in violation of the Torah because I had a shave a few days ago. But I believe it's a rabbinic misconception that should be cleared up once and for all. Look at the text. You shall not round the corners of your heads, neither should you mar the corners of your beard. Now, the Hebrew word here, if you look up in the Hebrew, is the Hebrew word nakaf. Nakaf. And it means to strike with violence, to beat, or to destroy. So this act wasn't just an act of shaving in the mirror, but this was a violent act of plucking and striking. Why? That's the question that we need to ask. Hebrew word here is nakaf in Leviticus 19:27. And look what verse 28 says, in context. You should not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor print, the Hebrew word there is ketholbeth, or ka-akar, which means to tattoo, to cut, or to brand any marks upon you. I am Yahweh. What's going on here? This is all talking about pagan sun god practices and the mourning for the dead. And it's actually quite popular nowadays with young people. If somebody dies, they actually get a tattoo, a mark cut into their flesh with maybe the dead person's birthday or something like that. There's nothing new under the sun. That actually is a violation of Yahweh's word. We're not to go and do that to our bodies because we're to be an unhewn stone that is ready to be a living sacrifice. He's created a temple. We're not to make a chisel mark or to get a stone that has the markings of man on it. So we understand that we're not to do these things, but specifically as pagan sun god customs. Look at Leviticus 21 and the 5th verse. They shall not make baldness upon their head, neither shall they shave off the corner of their beard, nor make any cuttings in their flesh. Of course, this is another pagan sun god practice where the pagans would mourn, and what they would do is they would pull out their hair with violence. They would pull out their hair with violence. They would make their head and beard, they would pluck it, and they would also begin to slash and cut themselves. This pagan practice has actually been adopted by some sects within Islam, because we know that the first moon god, of course, was the pre-Islamic moon god Sin, which in the 6th century became Allah, right? One of the pre-Islamic moon gods. So again, these customs can move into pagan idolatry of the nations, and they're not supposed to be for the children of Yahweh. Look at some texts that deal with these pagan practices when it comes to shaving. It's not, you're shaving your face to look good for work in the morning, but it is plucking out with violence because you're involved in pagan sun god worship, or slashing yourself, or branding and tattooing marks on yourself, because we're not to do that. Now, some of us, we made some stupid mistakes before we were born again. So myself, for instance, I had a tattoo when I was 21 years old. I repented of it. I believed that it was sin, transgression of the Torah. I didn't know. But what am I to do now? The only way I can get rid of it is either to brand myself, which is a violation of the Torah, to cut myself again and get it cut out, which would be I'm stuck with it, right? It's a consequence of my past. But what I should not do now is go headlong into a tattoo parlor and go and to get tattooed up, because this is supposed to be, now that I've come to the knowledge of sin, him who knows it is sin, it is sin. I would never go headlong into destruction again, but it's just part of my life journey. But I would teach my children differently, not to brand, mark, or tattoo their bodies. Does that make sense? Let's continue on. Isaiah 15 verse 2 is a great example. He is gone up to Bajith and to Dibon, the high places to weep. Moab shall howl over Nebo and over Medaba. On all their heads shall be baldness and every beard cut off. Another example, Jeremiah 47 verse 4. Because the day cometh to spoil all the Philistines and to cut off Tyrus and Zidon, every helper that remains. For Yahweh will spoil the Philistines, the remnant of the country of Caphtor. Baldness is come upon Gaza. Ashkelon is cut off with the remnant of their valley. How long will you cut yourself? Can you see now the similitudes as this is now being brought forth in the scripture? Jeremiah again gives us another example in Jeremiah 48, verse 37. For every head shall be made bald, and every beard clipped. Upon all the hands shall be cuttings, and upon the loins sackcloth. There shall be lamentation generally upon all the housetops of Moab, and in the streets thereof. For I have broken Moab like a vessel wherein there is no pleasure, says Yahweh. Even Israel, in her day of judgment, will mourn in a way that Yahweh forbids. They will wear sackcloth. Terror will cover them. Shame will be on all their faces, and all over their heads will be shaved bald. This has got to do with mourning in a way that Yahweh forbids. It's got nothing to do with me having a meeting in the morning and wanting to get out a little bit of Old Spice and a razor. Not that I would use Old Spice, but you know what I'm saying, right? I think my dad used that once, or maybe more than once. Well, look at Ezekiel, the prophet himself. 27 verse 30 is written, and shall cause their voice to be heard against thee, and shall cry bitterly, and shall cast up dust upon their heads. They shall wallow themselves in ashes. They shall make themselves utterly bald for thee, and gird them with sackcloth, and they shall weep for thee, and with a bitterness of heart and bitter wailing. Now, even Amos the prophet, he describes a time when Yahweh's judgments would bring about mourning for the nations. Amos chapter 8, verse 9, it is written, in that day, says the Master Yahweh, I will make the sun set at noon and make the earth dark in the midst of the day. I will turn your festivals into funerals, all your songs into funeral dirges. I will make everyone wear funeral clothes and cause your head to be shaved bald. I will make you mourn as if you had lost your only son. When it ends, it will indeed have been a very bitter day. So this is the context of shaving in the Bible, is what? Pagan sun god worship, and not worshiping Yahweh the way the heathen worship their gods. do not get into syncretism. But now when Ezekiel is instructed to shave, it's not a violation of the Torah because he's not doing it for pagan sun god worship, is he? He is doing it for prophetic implication of the prophecy of the thirds. So people are unbalanced when they're weighing the scripture, not taking into the full counsel of the word of Yahweh and then drawing false conclusions based upon a false premise. Well, you can't shave. That's a violation of the Torah. You sinner. You're like, well, hang on a minute. I'm not doing it as a pagan mourning custom. And if that was so, if your interpretation is correct, then Ezekiel is a false prophet, which we know, heaven forbid, that is just not so. Look at Deuteronomy 12, verse 30. Take heed to yourself that you are not snared by following them, after that they be destroyed before you, that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods? We will do the same. You must not worship Yahweh your Elohim in their way. Doesn't matter if it feels good in your heart. You will not worship Yahweh the way the heathen worship their gods, even if it got imported into the faith by the Catholics at the Council of Nicaea. Doesn't make it true. In this generation is like, why are we doing that? Hang on a minute. Let me get this right. We're going to go outside and cut down the tree and bring the tree inside. Then we're going to take all the lights that we got inside the house and we're going to go outside and put them outside. And any normal kid that hasn't grown up in syncretism is like, what? That makes no sense. Well, no, it doesn't make any sense because it's a heathen custom that got imported into the faith. But we know this. Jeremiah the prophet speaks of it in the 10th chapter and the 2nd verse. Thus says Yahweh, learn not the way of the heathen. And of course, he goes on to describe the origins of Christmas and the origins of the Christmas tree and how it was exported from Babylon to the Celtic tribes in Gaul and later imported by the Germans as they made it over to here, the New World. I mean, it used to be illegal back in the 1600s in the Plymouth colony to celebrate Christmas. I mean, it was actually illegal in this country. Why? Because they were Puritans, because they actually read their Bible. Every year they would read through the whole of the Bible. That's something that we all need to commit to. Every single year is reading through the whole of the Bible, and then we'll get the whole context of Scripture, and we'll be like, oh, I can see how people have compromised, generations have compromised, and then you, as young people, when you go to your universities and you see how people have become so lukewarm in the faith, it's because they haven't received the whole counsel of the Word, and then you stand and you're like, well, hang on a minute. No, we're not supposed to have sex before marriage. No, we're not supposed to live together and shack up. Read the Word. We're supposed to live a holy, pure life and be a light to a sick and perverted world. But where is that nowadays? When you stand up for righteousness, you become what? A target because you're the messenger. And sometimes people just like to shoot messengers, right? But that doesn't mean that we compromise because, again, the Plymouth colony, they didn't compromise. It wasn't until the 1830s that the pagan custom took root at the hands of German settlers in Pennsylvania. The pagan tradition of the Christmas tree, which, of course, Jeremiah is addressing in chapter 10, it made it over to England through Prince Albert, who was Germanic. He married Queen Victoria, and that was something that became very popular in Victorian England, but it was because of Prince Albert, because his family of course, Germanic, the Gauls, had been doing that custom for several centuries. Deuteronomy 12, it says this, "You shall not worship Yahweh the way the heathen worship their gods. Thou shalt not do so unto Yahweh your Elohim. For every abomination to Yahweh which he hateth have they done unto their gods." So the command here, going back to our text, the command given to Ezekiel with the straight edge barber razor is distinct from the command that we should not cut ourselves or rip or ruin or pull out our hair with violence as a practice of pagan sun god worship. Ezekiel chapter 5 in this 13th scroll is just one of many, a handful of scriptural references in which shaving or trimming of the head and beard is completely acceptable. I mean, think about the Nazarene vow, the Nazarite vow in Numbers chapter 6. Yahweh commands that you what? Shave. Well, why would he do that if it's a violation of his Torah? That makes no sense, because the vow of the Nazarite is a commitment unto Yahweh. He's not mourning. He's not getting involved in pagan customs. Heaven forbid. It's actually the converse of that. It's a dedication unto Yahweh. Therefore, it is, of course, totally acceptable. But the synagogue of Satan, they fail to examine the difference of when it's acceptable to shave and why, and when and how it's not acceptable and why. That's the key point. So we're to do Bible things Bible ways, not pagan things, pagan sun god ways, even if it's got a Catholic stamp of approval on it. We're just not to do that stuff. So Ezekiel now is going to demonstrate that Yahweh is going to sever. Think about this. We're going back to the barber razor, and this will make more sense with some of you that are hairier than others that are not so hairy. And notice that I'm looking down at the text here. I'm not looking at any of you. Ezekiel is going to demonstrate that Yahweh is going to sever his connection, Dane, his connection to his people by the sword. He's going to sever them and send them into exile. Why? Because shaving breaks the connection of the hair to the body, some more than others, right? Right? With me, you know, there's not much of a connection, as you can see, all right? Others, there's you know, it really does break the connection, does it not? It's an object lesson that alludes to the connection of the house of Israel to Yahweh, because they are going to be severed. Just as Yahweh severs the sword as this sharp, honed, straight-edge barber razor, there's a severing, a connection between the head and the body. That's what Ezekiel is prophetically saying to the house of Israel. Hey, house of Israel, this barber razor, this shaving instrument, it's to demonstrate that there is going to be a separation from the head, Yahweh, than the body. Now the body, you, are going to be scattered into the nations. That's what he's communicating, a separation of the head from the body. That's what shaving does. So let's look, of course, the hair on the head alludes to the wicked, whereas the hair on the face alludes to the righteous. Look at the first 1/3. The first 1/3 is going to be burnt with fire. Means that's the people inside Jerusalem who died from starvation. Now, Jeremiah tells us in Lamentations chapter 5, verse 10, it is written, "Our skin was black like an oven because of the terrible famine." So you can see that famine and starvation is likened to what? A black oven. Fever and famine are likened to being scorched by an oven by the prophet Jeremiah. That's the first 1/3 judgment. Now the second 1/3 judgment is they're going to be struck with the barber's razor. What does that allude to? Well, remember Zedekiah? Remember Zedekiah and the people of Judah? What happened to them? They tried to escape through the garden and they got caught by the Chaldeans, didn't they? And then Zedekiah was taken and blinded, was he not? Remember? You're looking at me? Yeah? Okay. Okay, because you're looking at me like, what am I talking about? Are you awake, man? Okay, good. Just checking. Now, the third 1/3 is there's going to be a scattering to the wind. And this is, of course, the house, the body of Israel is going to be scattered into the nations as part of the judgment. And of course, that speaks of when Johanan, son of Kareah, and his company, who disobeyed Jeremiah, and they fled to Egypt, and they were killed by the sword. I'll read to you from Jeremiah 43. This is the historical account. Jeremiah 43 verse 4 is written, "So Johanan the son of Kareah and all the captains of the forces and all the people, they obeyed not the voice of Yahweh to dwell in the land of Judah. But Johanan the son of Kareah and all the captains of the forces, they took all the remnant of Judah that were returned from all nations, whether they had been driven to dwell in the land of Judah, even men and women and children and the king's daughters and every person. Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, had left with Gedaliah, the son of Anacham, the son of Shaphan, and Jeremiah the prophet, and Baruch, the son of Neriah." Verse 7. "So they came into the land of Egypt, for they obeyed not the voice of Yahweh. Thus came they even to Taphnes. Then came the word of Yahweh unto Jeremiah in Taphnes, saying, Take great stones in thine hand, and hide them in the clay and in the brick lane, which is in the entry of Pharaoh's house in Taphnes, in the sight of the men of Judah. And say unto them, Thus says Yahweh of hosts, the Elohim of Israel, Behold, I will send and take Nebuchadrezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and will set his throne upon these stones which I have hid. And he shall spread his royal pavilion over them. And when he cometh, he shall smite the land of Egypt, and deliver such as are for death. He will deliver them unto death. And such are for captivity, he will deliver them for captivity. And such are for the sword, you see the thirds here, are for the sword. And I will kindle a fire in the houses of the gods of Egypt, and shall burn them and carry them away captive. So you can see historically how these third prophetical vision right here now is playing out. Go back to our text of Ezekiel chapter 5 and verse 5. This says the Master Yahweh, this is Jerusalem. I have set it in the midst of the nations and countries that are around her. So Ezekiel, at this point, he took some of the hair which represented the numbered few, and what did he do with it? He threw it into the fire. So he takes this hair, he throws it into the fire, and this alludes to what? This alludes to the false prophets, if you remember, Ahab and Zedekiah, who were killed by Nebuchadnezzar. Jeremiah 29, verse 21. Ahab, the son of Koliah, and of Zedekiah, the son of Maaseh, which prophesy a lie unto you in my name. Behold, I will deliver them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and he shall slay them before your eyes. So that's what that piece of hair represents. So the hair thrown into the fire, it's also a remez, a hint about the destruction of the two temples, right? What would happen to the two temples? They would be burnt down and thrown into the fire, would they not? And then from those temples would the nation of Israel be exiled into first Babylon, of course, and then exiled into the nations. And those who died in the aftermath of the assassination of Gedaliah in Jeremiah 41 would be included. So either way, the fire will spread. This is what Ezekiel's saying. This fire, it's going to spread to all Israel when they're once again exiled after the destruction of the temple. Because when I look at this, and this is the final vision, as it was then, so it is today. As it was then, so it is today. Because it's the judgment then as is now. Like I shared last week, there's a judgment of thirds. And even in the book of Revelation, how many woes are there? Woe, woe, woe. So there's a future prophetical woe judgment. And it's a judgment of thirds. Can we see that? It's coming in the future, is it not? And I spoke about last week the timeline of the time where the 10 northern tribes of Israel were exiled by the Assyrians. And we did the timeline of how many years, according to the prophecy, that they would be exiled. And that exile, by calculation in last week's teaching, we said ended in 2010. And many of us have come to the knowledge that we are Israel, and we are what? As Yahusha says, I have not come but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He's going to gather us as a shepherd into one flock. We've come to that knowledge in the past, 10 years or so. But according to the calculation in last week's teaching that I shared, that there's this window of prophetic time which is split into thirds. And 1/3 has passed from 2010 to 2018. And 2/3 remain to 2038 of this time of regathering. So we're really in this last 2/3 time of regathering, where this message that, hey, come out of her, my people, start to now live a dedicated, holy life and recognize that you're to graft into the olive tree of Israel, that your identity isn't to be some pagan syncretistic worshiper, but an actual worshiper of Yah, the one true living Elohim. So if 1/3 has passed and 2/3 remain, and we look at this text and we can see that there are 3/3 judgments, right? You've got 1/3, a 2nd third, and a 3rd third. We see really 2010 was the return. And if 2038 is the closure, then what is the closure to? Well, Jeremiah, the prophet, tells us that, first of all, Yahweh is going to send out what? Fishers of men. But if people don't listen to the fishermen, then what will he do? He will send the hunters. Well, what are these hunters? If we're looking at the closure at around 2038, and we look at the world that we're living in, I think we're talking about hunter drones. And I think that this is in full preparation for 2045 and technological singularity. I think that you're going to see hunter drones, I really do, in preparation for full 2045 technological singularity and the mark of the beast. Because this is all in that time window where we're seeing this marriage of technology with the human body. Most of us, I would say all of us in here, we have got, of course, our natural bodies, and we're carrying an electronic device. But it's going to come a time when, and you're already starting to see that, where it actually is part of your body. It's part of your makeup. I mean, and people are going to want it to be more and more convenient. Oh, I forgot my phone. Oh, I sat on my phone and broke it. Well, they're going to actually want it to be a part of their body. And could I even go as far as saying this? There may come a time, and I think we discussed this, where you will be at a disadvantage because the majority of people will have this kind of technology embedded in them, that your intelligence will not be able to keep up with the kind of machine technology that they've got downloading. They'll be like, oh, what is this? And they're boop, and all of a sudden there'll be a total download of that information for that particular job. And we've seen it in movies, right? Where, what is it? The one with Keanu Reeves, where he has to like get the program download for the helicopter. I mean, that is not far-fetched. And all of a sudden you'll be able to, pilot a helicopter, right? I mean, the world is changing. Did Ezekiel see these things? I'm not saying he saw that, but he definitely saw the 1/3 prophecy. Now, conversely, one woe has passed and two remain. Look at Ezekiel chapter 6, verse 9. And they that escape from you shall remember me among the nations, where they shall be carried as captives. Have we not remembered Yahweh as we have been scattered amongst the nations? Some of us didn't even grow up in the faith. And how did we remember Yahweh? As we have been scattered here amongst the nations. Because I am broken with their whorish heart, which has departed from me, with their eyes which go a-whoring after their idols, and they shall despise themselves for the evils which they have committed in all their abominations. And that's the testimony of so many people, especially if you didn't grow up in the faith. You know you were scattered in the nations, and you come to this founding faith, and you're like, it's got to be bigger than just sitting in a pew on a Sunday and singing a few hymns. What does it really mean to be a believer? How were the believers in the first century walking? I mean, are we really supposed to be just kind of like the world but Christian? Surely not. Surely we have to be distinctly different, and we have to affect change. And change can only be effective if we live a transformed life. So it's powerful that this prophecy says that they will remember me after this curse runs its full course. In around 2010, according to the calculation, there's going to be this great ingathering window of thirds. From 2010 to 2038, there's going to be this ingathering. But those that don't listen to the gospel being preached of gather, 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 then the hunter drones will come out, and there'll be this technological singularity which they're pushing for. I think it's 2045, isn't it? They're saying that's going to happen. But then I can get back to the plain sense of the text, because that's the sensible me, right? Ezekiel chapter 6, verse 9. They that escape, of course, speaks of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? But that's not quite as fun as what I'm talking about. But in reality, if we look at the text, yes, it's talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel 3, because they remembered Yahweh amongst the nations, did they not? They were carried away to Babylon as captives, and they refused to go whoring after idols. Even at the threat of the fiery furnace, they did not transgress the word of Yahweh. And as it was then, so it shall be again. Because it says, those who stay steadfast in the faith, what does the prophet Malachi say? Just as it was with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it says that they that stay steadfast shall tread down the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of their feet in the day that I shall do this, says Yahweh Sabaoth. That's Malachi 4. Think about it. We're going to be standing at the judgment seat of Messiah, and you're literally going to be walking over the burnt, charred bodies of the wicked that have turned to ash. Now, some of you are going to be like, oh, the wicked, the wicked, the wicked. But me, I mean, I'm just going to be like, just take my time, just grind. I mean, really, all of the wicked. You're not sure if I'm joking, if I'm serious, okay. Think about it, though. That's what it says, Malachi 4. In the last days, death will be everywhere. And those who will be able to escape the battlefield, well, they'll die in the plague. Those who are nearby, well, they'll die by the sword. And those that survive the battle, they'll die of starvation. Kind of sounds like the coming great tribulation, doesn't it? Doesn't sound so good. Where would you want to be? As for me and my house, I want to be under the covering of Yahusha. I want to be under the covering of my great high priest. It's the only providential protectorship that we need is Yahusha, Yahusha alone. Where fire judgment can actually be inverted and transformed from judgment to glorification. And that's what Malachi 4 is. It's an inversion, isn't it? Where fire judgment is actually turned into glorification. Those that are wicked, yes, they'll get the judgment. But those that are faithful to the end will be just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They will be in the fire, and there in the fire will be Yahusha, and you will literally walk upon the wicked as they turn to ashes. Look at chapter 7, verse 1 of Ezekiel. Moreover, the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, also you, son of man, this says the master Yahweh to the land of Israel, an end, the end is come upon the four corners of the land. So this is actually Ezekiel and the revelation of the 13 scrolls. Like I said, this is the 13th scroll. But according to the Masoretic text, this is what? Chapter 7, which would be like one of the first visions. But why does it say here, the end? And just in case you didn't get it, it says it again, the end. It's a climatic end. This is the end of the vision. This is the end of the prophecy. Verse 2 gives the clear twofold repetition. In the Hebrew, you get the Hebrew word ketz. It's very clear. Ketz. And then if you didn't catch it, ketz again. The end has come. So what should we do? What should we do? Now, go, the Hebrew word for go is bow. It can mean come as well. Go, come. Bow and prepare, because we must be ready, for our time is written. Because the prophecy says in Revelation 13:10, the same thirds are a-coming. Just as Ezekiel has a prophecy of the thirds, there's going to be a thirds prophecy that's coming to the last generation. Look what it says in Revelation 13:10. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. And here is the patience and faith of the saints. So what's the purpose for the life that you and I are to live now? Yahweh wants to equip us so that we have the patience and perseverance of the saints. Because as it was then, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 judgment, so it will be on the last generation, a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 judgment. And if we cannot be equipped today, we will be no better than they in Ezekiel's day, which is why we're to heed the words of the prophets, which is why Ezekiel and the revelation of the 13 scrolls has been so important. How's it coming? How's this judgment going to come? Well, this is where I eat a little bit of humble pie, because quite honestly, you know, when we had the elections and Trump got in, I was like, whoa, what is this? This could be like a renaissance maybe, right? But now we're a little bit further down the road, and, I'm like, well, he's kind of quite the Machiavellian character, is he not? I don't think it's going to be quite this renaissance, but the synagogue of Satan's trying to convince us of some interesting stuff. So I figure as we're closing Ezekiel and the revelation of the 13 scrolls, and I pose the question of a Revelation 13:10, how is it going to be coming? Is it going to really be these hunter drones? Is it really going to be technological singularity by 2045? Well, we're living in some very interesting times. And there's been a lot of talk about collusion with Russia, hasn't there? But is this collusion really kind of how they're spinning it? Or is it even more sinister than what they're saying? Is there really more to it? There's something there. So in finality, as we close Ezekiel, with prophetic clarity, because I have prophetic clarity, as I think you have as we're going through this journey, realize there has been some sinister grooming going on for a very long time. There really has. Grooming that only the prophets Ezekiel and Daniel could shed light upon. A very, very sinister plan, I think, is moving ahead. And only 2/3 remain. Only 2/3 remain. What do I mean? I think we need to stay alert. I have this book at home. It's called The Great Game. It's a great read, and it talks about basically this great game that the British, especially in the Victorian times, had with the Russians over this strategic territory, which is now Afghanistan. And it was all about this great game and this big game being played between the British and the Russians. And now it's the West and the Russians. And now we're coming into this whole idea of collusion. I thought, well, it's really like a great game, but it's really being played on the masses. It's even being played on those in DC that don't understand the sinister aspects to what's really going on. Because I think a Russian union is being formed. I know you may think I'm mad, but I think a Russian union is being formed. In fact, you may remember back in the 80s, but Trump is actually the dove. He's the dove because he is a very Machiavellian character if you think about it. And I think he's been playing a game, a long game, since the 80s. So I've had to rethink Trump. I really have. Because the Trump administration has been clandestinely joining with Russia in a New World Order economic union. What's the purpose of this New World Order economic union? I think they're going to subdue other countries and expropriate their nuclear arms. I think they're going to put the economic squeeze on countries that aren't willing to work with them, and then that will cause them to go into civil war when these countries, come under this economic stronghold. And unless they give up the nuclear weapons, they continue to put economic sanctions on them. And I think there is this union that is being formed. Because it seems apparent to me that the dove, which is Donald Trump, has united with Putin, and in the process of crippling uncooperative nations with economic trade sanctions, when these nations, when they say, well, we're not going to comply with the demands of this back-channeled union, well then, they'll come under the judgment. Because I believe it's a prelude to the next world empire. I think Russia will actually gain territory along its southwestern border, and we're even seeing that right now if you're paying attention in the news. Daniel's, I think it's Daniel chapter 7, actually tells us about the Russian bear during the end times. It says 3 ribs, talks about these 3 ribs, and the 3 ribs may be nations along the western border, actually in the teeth of Russia. And 2 of these nations could actually be Kazakhstan, and another one could be Belarus. It's possible. I mean, we need to be alerted, basically, as we're looking at this Ezekiel and the 13th scroll, to not only the prophet Ezekiel, but all the prophets. Daniel, specifically in chapter 7, because I believe it's moving forward. I believe we're going to see this economic union. It's like unto the great game. It really is. Because Trump, I believe, has been masterminding this plan covertly since 1983. because in 1983, he actually appeared on the front of this magazine, and he was actually holding a dove. And you can look online and you'll find it. I forget the name of the magazine. What was it? Manhattan Magazine, or Manhattan Incorporated. That was what it was. Manhattan Incorporated. He's sitting on the front of this magazine holding a dove, and he's known for the dove. And if you read the article, it's all about him trying to do this backdoor deal to be this peace broker in the Middle East, and how he's going to join in an economic partnership with the Russians. So this is on record since the 80s. Now, why would they do this? Well, is it possible that Trump and Putin are working behind the scenes to form an economic union together, that if other nations don't comply and give up their nuclear arms, they'll put economic sanctions on them, cripple them economically, which will then cause rioting, the yellow vests in the streets. And basically what you're going to actually have is a new great game, a new world order, and it's actually all been designed from the 80s. So, has Trump been masterminding this since the 80s, covertly, since 1980, 83? Well, the cover of the 80s magazine, Manhattan Inc., would unveil, in fact, the plan to create a political union so that Trump could ultimately broker a peace accord in the Middle East. And what has he done already in 2018? Moved the embassy to Jerusalem. That was huge. That was more than any other president had done, right? The embassy move has already proven to be the most popular move among any sitting president. What a great accomplishment, really, for him in just a short time. So this has really affected the state of Israel's history, and now this union is poised to devour much flesh, because Daniel chapter 7 verse 5 says this: "And behold, another beast, a second like a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, go and devour much flesh." So there's even like this Israeli organization right now that's come out with a Cyrus Trump temple coin. Yeah, they're literally minting a Cyrus Trump temple coin. And it says on it, to fulfill 70 years. Of course, that's a double entendre, because they were in the land of Babylon for 70 years until Cyrus let them go to build the temple. But now, from 1948 to the Trump embassy move of 2018 is what? 70 years. So they've got this, they're minting this Trump coin with Cyrus and Trump on one side, and then on the other side, the dove. The dove, which is Trump, the 1983 front page of the Manhattan Inc. magazine, where he lays out his plan that he's been covertly working on for the past 30-odd years. That is 5D chess. Giving glory to the image of Trump. Trump's image glorified on the front side and a dove on the reverse side of the coin. What's going on with that? So now I have to question this whole Trump presidency. I don't think it was a miraculous fluke. I really don't. See, I thought, wow, what a fluke. But I don't think now, a little bit further on down the railroad track, I don't think it was a miraculous fluke. I think it was, or a fruit. I think it was pre-planned. I think it was a carefully executed plan, especially after talking with Bart Simpson. If you go back and look at that episode, what is that? Back to the Future, Bart to the Future or something, right? Back in the 90s. So we have some predictive programming going on, don't we? We've got some predictive programming, especially according to The Simpsons. You know, they had 9/11 as well. There's a lot of stuff going on with that. That's some serious predictive programming. And then there was a heavy metal magazine that came out. It was called, I forget what it was called, but it had a whole cartoon of Trump and the wall on it. And it was a heavy metal magazine, and it had a whole piece laid out about Trump building a wall. And this was back, I think, in the 90s. So there's definitely been some predictive programming along the way. I don't think it was a miraculous fluke anymore. So all that to say this, we're living in some exciting times. We really are. And it couldn't be more important for us to listen to the words of the prophets and have the prophetical word taught to us. Whether it be Ezekiel, whether it be Jeremiah, whether it be Daniel. Because all of these prophets, the reason that they were so powerful is because they had the spirit of Yahusha in them. They had the spirit of Yahusha in them. And that's why they were so prophetically powerful, because the spirit of Yahusha was in them, and they were able to inquire of the things that would happen in our generation. Which is why when I look at this revelation of Ezekiel and the 13 scrolls, and especially the 1/3, the 1/3, and the 1/3, but I also look at the book of Revelation with the 3 woes, that yes, they were inquiring of things in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, but they also had the spirit of Yahusha in them, and they were inquiring after you and I of this generation. And because we are inquiring after them, the prophets, what's the commonality? We all have the spirit of Yahusha in us. And this is what Peter said, and I'll finish up with this in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 10. Because we are living in exciting times, of which salvation the prophets have inquired and searched diligently, who prophesied of the grace that should come on you, searching what manner of time the Spirit of Messiah, which was in them, did signify, when it testified beforehand to the sufferings of Messiah and the glory that should follow. So all of this study of Ezekiel and the revelation of the 13 scrolls, understand that the commonality is the prophets were seeking after the future of which we now live in, and they were seeking after us. It was the Spirit of Messiah that empowered them and gave them the revelation. Yes, Ezekiel as the manic barber with the 3-fold prophecy, but that prophecy was not just for that generation with Nebuchadnezzar. It was also for you and I today, living on the very precipice of the book of Revelation. And because we in this generation have spent our time seeking after the prophets, whether it be Ezekiel, Daniel, Jeremiah, or whatever, that same spirit of Messiah is in us, which gives us revelation of these times that we live in. We are fully equipped. It's the perseverance of the saints. And that's what I love about the Bible, is it is alive and it is the living word. And yes, along the way, you hope that when a new president gets in and it's not a Democrat, oh, maybe we have the opportunity for a renaissance. Maybe this could be like a Cyrus. But then the synagogue of Satan gets hold of it and they're turning it, and you're like starting to see that Trump isn't quite what we've been led to believe by the Republican Party. He's quite this Machiavellian character. In fact, he's the dove. And I believe that we've got this union going on, backdoor, back-channeled with the Russians. It's another great game. And actually, if we're not wise to the words of the prophets, we'll be played just like everybody else. But thank Yah now that we have the wisdom and the fortitude to Endure and see. As everybody else is being deceived, now we can be weighed and balanced, because they're all, like you said before we started, they're all in the soulish realm. These politicians, they're all in the soulish realm. They're not in a spiritual realm seeking Yahweh. They are fighting in the flesh and fighting in the soulish carnal realm. And therefore, they're given over to the synagogue of Satan and everything that we see on this minted coin with the trump on the front, with Cyrus and the dove on the back. In the meantime, there is a collusion, but it's not quite as we seem. So as the yellow jackets continue to let smoke bombs go in Paris, we shall see what Antifa does in Portland, Oregon, and wherever. But again, I feel more equipped for the days and times that we live in, because the Spirit of Messiah is in me, as the Spirit of Messiah is in you. As we inquire of the prophets, they were inquiring of us. 1 Peter 1:10 is a powerful verse to keep us in line as we now delve into the prophetical word. So it's been an amazing journey for me. I can't believe that I actually got through Ezekiel and the revelation of the 13 scrolls. What an amazing journey. It's been exciting, so much to see. And just to encapsulate it all for me, it's 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 10. Just knowing that we are of one accord with prophetical, powerful impact, the same as the prophets. Because oftentimes you read the Bible and you go, oh, those prophets, oh yeah, I can't be like. No, but we can. They were seeking after you. And that because you are seeking their prophetical writings, we have the same Spirit, which is the Spirit of Messiah, which makes us sharper than a two-edged sword, right? The barber razor. So bless you. Abba, we thank you for this word. We thank you for your word. And Abba, pray that you would be with your people. And we just thank you, Father, and ask that you will continue to guard us up and shore up our minds, shore up our bodies, and shore up our wills, Father, that we would be servants unto you in these great days. And we pray this and bless your holy name in Yahushua. Amen. Amen.